This is a video describing one of the main reasons that I think that the Northern Star is not a publication worth my time. I understand that it happens to be my university's publication, and my opinion is only that of myself, not of any organization I happen to be affiliated with. And I understand that it's entirely possible that the problems that I have with the Northern Star in a whole are actually problems that I have with particular unknown members of the Northern Star and the way they choose to write. However, I'm human, and as a result, I blame the Northern Star in general. It all started on September 15th of 2009 in an open editorial, the editorial titled Open Letter to the Illinois State Legislature Regarding MAP Grant Funding by the editorial board. I will read the letter in its entirety, which I saved at, the time it happened, long before they apparently decided to strike it from their website. It states, to the Illinois State Legislature, is it too much to ask to receive an education? In this state, the answer is apparently yes. We write to you on this day on behalf of ourselves and our peers in institutions of higher learning across the state of Illinois to put a face on the numbers you are so apathetically crunching. 137,000. That's how many students stand to suffer from the loss of the MAP grant program that helps pay the increasingly high cost of education. As you ponder how to deflate Illinois' $11.6 billion budget deficit, we really shouldn't be surprised to see something like the MAP program cut. It's time-tested politics. Mortgage the future to save a present made miserable by the same kind of thinking. It's a vicious cycle. But instead of trying to break the cycle, you have, in fact, accelerated it to a new level of short-sightedness. Sorry. NIU President John Peters stated in his State of the University address September 10th that Illinois suffers from a disinvestment in higher education. Our esteemed president could have said it better. He knows as well as we do that the loss of this funding could legitimately cause one-third of our student body to vanish when the clock strikes midnight, leaving NIU and countless other universities with a depleted student population. Clearly, robbing students the chance of an education in an effort to cover the tracks of your own failures as a state government is a sensible step. Students lose the aid to pay for school, factory workers sit at home on furlough, police and fire officials get laid off, the children pay for the sins of the parents. Illinois. Almost good enough. There's a state slogan for you, and you didn't even have to waste taxpayer dollars on a task force to figure it out. Consider it a freebie. To the surprise of no one, Illinois is clearly a state without a plan. The legislature is like a dog chasing its own tail, too caught up with spinning around in circles to realize the pointlessness of its endeavor. Our governor is no exception. State residents rejoiced when Rod Blagojevich, not a hair out of place, was unceremoniously thrown out of the governor's mansion in January. Foolishly. Many of us believed for a brief moment that new Governor Pat Quinn would infuse Springfield with some desperately needed sanity. While Quinn may not be a punchline on Conan in the matter his predecessor was, this time around the joke is clearly on us. Blaming Quinn for the state's burdensome budget deficit would be misguided. Wondering how he can possibly fix it, another matter entirely. Clearly, Quinn never wanted things to get this far. On his own government website, he specifically states not intending to cut educational grant programs and how devastating the aftermath of doing so would be. If only the irony was more amusing. We propose to you the reality that there is a way to tackle this deficit without costing the youth of this state the education it deserves. While there may be no magical fix to such a predicament, there are other practical options. Governor Quinn's proposed dollar cigarette tax is a start. And what about the state's bid to bring the 2016 Olympics to Chicago and the estimated $5 billion price tag it carries? Could the $366 million needed to build a temporary 80,000-seat stadium in Washington Park perhaps be redirected toward a cause that will ultimately last longer than a few weeks? Or are we willing to sacrifice the betterment of our society to attract tourists? Illinois needs to reassess its priorities, and it all starts with you. If you cut these grants and cost 137,000 students the chance at a better education, you have done disservice to your community. In a time when cuts are so prevalent, we challenge you to make an investment. Invest in us. Invest in the future, or we may not have one to speak of. Sincerely, the Northern Star Editorial Board. I was disheartened, to say the least, because the way they chose to open their letter came across as very entitled. And while I rely on MAP grant funding too, at the same time, I realize that they're putting forth a lot of logical fallacies within that argument. It's the college debater in me. I know a logical fallacy when I see one. And as a result, I felt compelled to write a letter in response that, shockingly, they chose to print, unedited. Dear Editorial Board, while your open letter to the Illinois legislature was interesting, it contained arguments that were fundamentally flawed. First, if it were too much to ask to receive an education, Illinois would stop funding all public schools, primary and secondary. Since that's not happening, nor would it ever happen, I feel it's a little absurd to say that the potential loss of the MAP grant means that students shouldn't receive an education. Side note, one of the reasons I said this is because Northern Illinois University is a public university, meaning that it is supported primarily through money from the Illinois state government. As a result, making the argument that we don't deserve an education because they cut the MAP grant, if we didn't deserve an education, they'd shut down NIU. That's where I was going with that. Back to the letter. Second, during a recession when most states are having budget crises, it's a bit naive to expect that non-essential parts of the budget, like the MAP grant, should be salvaged while essential parts are sacrificed. It's unrealistic and selfish to expect that to be the case. Third, putting forth the concept that a removal of Chicago's bid for the Olympics could be a viable solution to the possible loss of the MAP grant in spring 2010 is ludicrous. In fact, the only way that the state would spend money on the Olympics was after it already happened, since the state provided a monetary guarantee in case there was a net loss of money. Finally, the overall idea that the state of Illinois is somehow responsible for students' tuition is preposterous. Don't misunderstand. I'm one of those students whose ability to attend college will be greatly impacted without the MAP grant. However, it is not the government's job to make sure that I can afford a college education. Grants, state or federal, are a privilege, not a right. If it's Illinois' fault for not supplying students with the MAP grant, it's parents' fault for not earning and saving more to be able to pay for their children's education. It's also, too, the fault of we, the students, for not earning and saving more for our own education. The student who pinches every penny to stretch their financial aid and savings in order to afford school, those are the students who will have my sympathy if forced to leave school because the MAP grant is removed. However, the students who spend money on non-essentials, such as going out, eating out, alcohol, cable, etc., and I fall into this category, they do not have my sympathy. Just as the irresponsible homeowners who took out debt, arms, they couldn't pay partially due to irresponsible spending, so too do many college students take on debt, tuition, etc., while making poor financial decisions. We aren't blameless because we're young, and a college education is not a right. We must place the blame where blame is due, and it isn't all at the feet of the Illinois legislature. Sincerely, me. So, yeah, that is the reason that I am not a huge fan of the Northern Star. While, yes, ultimately MAP grant funding did remain, the arguments that they put forth were silly. I rely on federal funding and MAP grants and federal loans as much as the next girl, if not more so. But at the same time, I recognize that my education is a privilege, not a right. Because if it was a right, then every 26-year-old woman in this country would have had an education, a college education. And I can think of several right now who weren't afforded that opportunity for a variety of reasons. The problem is when you start to place blame at the feet of somebody who isn't solely responsible, say the Northern Star at the feet of the Illinois legislature, it reduces your credibility in more than one area. Because if you, as the editorial board, can't be bothered to see that it's not just the legislature's fault if you can't afford to go to school, and that while we can be grateful for the help that they provided, they aren't obligated to do so, you lose credibility in other areas, and smart, intelligent college students like me start thinking that every time you open your proverbial mouth, you're gonna stick your or someone else's foot inside. It's the reason that I stopped picking up copies of the Northern Star to see what they had to say. Because honestly, I found that everything they had to say was not worth my time. Because to be honest, if I just wanted to listen to people that I considered to be illogical and crazy, I'd just have more phone calls with my mother. Now, yes, that's a little harsh, but I'm hoping that those of you who don't know me can see it for the joke that it is, and those who do know me can laugh, because they understand that, yes, at times my mother is just a little illogical and just a little crazy. But rumor has it, so are a lot of other people's mothers.